Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first ever Code Wars live stream. As you can imagine, every first live stream has a couple of issues in the beginning, but hopefully they don't follow us through today's event. So thank you so much for joining. We are live on Zoom events and on YouTube. That is so anyone who feels like a Zoom experience gets one, and anyone on YouTube and across our socials can also join in as well. We do have a little bit of housekeeping. So first of all, for both of our streams, we have a chat functionality for Zoom. You can pop that up from the chat button at the bottom of your screen. On YouTube, it should be there on the right-hand side or just below the video if you're joining us from mobile. Do chat to everyone in the community. Let us know where you're calling in from and chat to our team. We're in both chats, ready to talk to you. You can ask us questions throughout today. We will answer most of them at the end. For people on Zoom, we have a Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. For people on YouTube, you're going to use the chat functionality to ask us questions. Make sure there is a question mark there so our team knows to answer your question and bring it over into the live stream. Before we get going, I'd like to introduce myself. In case you don't know me or you don't recognize me from Code Wars, I am Vanessa. I'm based in Ireland and I focus on experience for Code Wars. So that is your overall experience from user experience, our emails, anything that you connect with Code Wars. I've probably interacted with it at some point. And for today, I'll be taking a little bit of a seat back and chatting to our wonderful co-founder, Jake Hoffner, who is currently backstage, and we're going to drag him all the way over onto the stage. So Jake is joining us from the US this morning, and he is currently our Senior Director of Product Management as well in Andela, but still very, very passionate and focused on Code Wars. Jake, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Glad to be here. This is cool. This is our first live stream, so excited.
Very excited. Yes, I've definitely needed a little bit of extra coffee and sugar to to really ramp up on a Friday, but it's a good way to end a week. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump into our core questions, just in case I haven't covered it all?
Sure. Yeah, so I I guess professionally I started when I was 20, so I was a self-taught engineer. So I'm old now. I've been doing this for 24 years. Um, I I started off actually really more as a designer. So I had kind of like in high school and I was doing a lot of design stuff and I was really interested in I'm not so much artistic, but I enjoyed kind of putting things together. Um, and then from that, I kind of started to work, at that point in time, it was kind of before the dot-com crash, and everybody was just trying to get a website online. Like that was a big deal if you could just have a website for your business. So I started doing a lot of design around HTML. So I learned HTML initially, and then Flash was really big back then. So that's kind of how I got into programming was I started building Flash sites and then learning ActionScript to kind of make interactive environments within Flash. And then it was in JavaScript, and I kind of just kind of went from there. But yeah, so and then probably about 12 years into my career is when I started Codewars.
And rest in peace, Flash. I think
Yes.
were you on the loving or hating side?
I miss it. I mean, I think there was like this like really cool like creative time back then where the websites like we still haven't recreated that effect. Like there was websites where the usability was terrible. I mean, you couldn't figure out how to use it because it was like so creative how they would make you navigate the thing, but it was like a puzzle to just try to figure out how to use it. But it was always like this really artistic, creative thing. And I think we've lost that a little bit. I think the world went to more like more practicality. And I think we're getting it back with a lot of the kind of like, more powerful websites that are using CSS animations and different things. But um, no, yeah, I wasn't against it.
It
Although
had its
programming
uses.
with it wasn't the easiest. So I was also by that at that point in my career, I had already moved beyond it. But
Yeah, it definitely, I remember some challenges with it in university, and it was a nightmare to use the student packages, but we won't get into that.
Yeah.
So we'll start today's conversation at the beginning. So after your wealth of experience in being a self-taught programmer, what inspired you and the team to start Code Wars? What was the aha moment that began one, the idea, but then also going out and making Code Wars?
Yeah. So, um, let me give you some context. I don't know if I answer that specifically. So I got to a point in my career where I really wanted to start a company, but I didn't know who to start a company with. And so I started attending a lot of hackathons. And at first, it were more like just pure engineering hackathons, like just show up and build some cool stuff. And those are great, and that like really like allowed me to tap into kind of the more of the creative energy that I had. But um, it wasn't kind of like it wasn't the best fit in terms of finding a great co-founder. And then I started going to an event called Startup Weekend. And ended up going to three of them. The first one I went to, met great people, we didn't win, but it was a cool experience. Second one I went to, we actually won. And there was kind of this experience of kind of investors looking to reach into us. And let me give you some background on Startup Weekend for those who may not know. So
Yeah.
the difference between that format and a normal hackathon format is it's not just engineers coming and kind of building something cool. The idea is that you kind of have the genesis of a company to be invested in at the end of like a 54-hour kind of time frame. And so it tends to be business people, designers, and engineers who all show up and kind of form teams. Somebody goes, usually the business person, but not necessarily, goes and pitches an idea. A bunch of people pitch ideas. They kind of go and rally people to join their team. And then they spend kind of like 2 days trying to build something, and then on the last day they present it. And so the second one I went to, we won and kind of went through this experience of having a team, but the idea wasn't super in love with it, and it just didn't really work out. Um, but then the third one I went to is where I met my co-founder for Nathan for Code Wars, and so he actually pitched the idea, which was Code Wars, which I was like already hooked with the name. There's just like nothing else really mattered. I was just like, okay, Code Wars. I don't know what it is, but let's do it. Um, and and it was just this basic idea of trying to find um, great engineers in the world and help them find jobs and doing that through challenge and like doing that through something that's, it was kind of like the idea, like he loved hackathons, I loved hackathons. It was kind of this like we immediately, found alignment in terms of, well, let's take this hackathon format and do something else with it. Like maybe we can make it virtual, or we're not quite sure. So that's kind of how it formed, is was pitched. I immediately signed up. We joined together. Some other people came on board as well for that weekend. But largely it was just me and him that were doing kind of leading that. And during that weekend, we had no idea what to actually do with it. Like we sat there for like a day and a half of like the 2 days or like 2.5 days you kind of get to build things. Like just what are we gonna do? Like what's the actual business around this? And then finally at some point we kind of we figured it out. So we ended up building kind of like this Mortal Kombat interface where you kind of fight each other through code. If anyone's been around Code Wars long enough to remember the little challenges we had on the landing page, those are actually some of those are still taken from that event where you were using those challenges, and the idea was that you had the code faster than they did, and every time that you beat the challenge before they did, then you would kind of like you'd punch them. It was like a little Sub-Zero and Scorpion fighting each other. Um, and we ended up making it actually work for the weekend, and people could log on. And like when we did our pitch, when we did our live demo, people were actually like logging on live and using it. Um, and so it won. And then two of those investors that were on that panel ended up investing in us.
Amazing. And what was that's a very short time, obviously, to come up with a first pass at a working product. What was the most challenging part especially when you're meeting a team that you've never met most of them before, you might have seen each other at hackathons, but you don't know each other. What was the most difficult part in building that first version?
Yeah, well, funny enough, the actual building of it was the easy part. Like once we kind of figured out what to do, it was actually I went and did that part while the rest of the team kind of worked on kind of more of like the business presentation and also just a basic website. And it wasn't just that interface; it was also the idea of doing hackathons. So they kind of worked on that part of it, and then I worked on kind of more of the like what's the fun, engaging part of all of this that people would want to come for. So and at that point, I mean, kind of doing more of a lone wolf sort of project was something I was very used to. So I was fine doing that. The hard part was actually getting to the point where we knew what we were doing. Um, there was just a lot of debate and a lot of kind of understanding where everyone's coming from, especially not just meeting everybody at that weekend. So it's not even like we had a working relationship to go off to figure out an idea from. We had to figure it all out at the same time. That was definitely the biggest struggle.
And are there any ideas that came out of that that haven't yet made it into Code Wars that you'd love to add in? I know that's
Yeah,
going back a
definitely.
bit, but
Yeah, I mean, when we once we got investing, and it wasn't a lot, but it was enough that like I and eventually Nathan convinced me to quit my job and like take an 80% pay cut and go work on this. And it was it was like probably I can't remember the amount of time, but it was the same issue all over again. What are we actually going to build? Like okay, this was cool for like a weekend and like got people excited, but like this whole Mortal Kombat thing is like it's a cool novelty, but it's not like a sustainable cool like thing. Like what's the actual thing going to be? Um, and so there was a lot of effort going into to figuring that out. Um, and the thing that we wanted to do was we wanted to build like I still really love the idea of a hackathon, and hackathons are I guess are still going on. Maybe I'm a little out of touch. I don't really feel their presence as much. Like back at that time, I was in Santa Monica, California, and it was kind of like there's a lot of energy, a lot of like creative energy. Like San Francisco was the place where tech happened, but Santa Monica was trying to like be its own hub. And there's just a lot of like energy that you can feel. And so we really wanted to bring that online in a more global scale. Um, and that's what we actually had set out to do. And we kind of got away from that for various reasons, which I think we can probably get into here. But um, I still love the idea of people creating like to me, I think coding can be viewed as more of an art form than just a thing that needs to be done in order to do something inside of a business. I think the business side of it is really important. Like when you go and build something, you have to respect that component. But I also think like you're taking something that doesn't exist, it's just an idea, and then you're turning it into something that people can use. And there's a lot of cool ideas that you can do that are very quick and that people can be excited about. And especially back then when like there wasn't there was people were still getting used to the idea of building things so quickly and being able to have access to it. Like I think cloud services was newer then, so there's just a lot of excitement. And I still think that excitement exists, and I want to bring that more of that into it, which I don't think we kind of got away from.
of course. And maybe I'm also a little I think COVID and other things globally in the past couple of years has taken me as well out of the hackathon space and event space, particularly in person. But what do you think would have happened? Do you think the future would have been different if it was for maybe a smaller hackathon that you met at, or without things like Startup Weekend and that investing and that business aspect to the hackathon? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I certainly, it's one opportunity to take, and there's different ways of doing things. So it's not like, it's not like I think if that didn't exist, would Code Wars exist? Maybe not. Maybe, like I think that came from that moment, and it wasn't. It was a collaboration of two people who probably wouldn't have met if it wasn't for that weekend. Um, but I do think less ideas would exist in the world without them, especially because I think in the engineering space, you're so focused on just doing a great job, and it's such a heads down kind of work. Building a network and like and having a bunch of people that you interact with that are outside of the company that you maybe you're working at is I think much harder as an engineer to build that network than it is for other people that are maybe more kind of extroverted in their role, right? Like they're through their own functions, they're just meeting other people in other places and creating more connections. And so I think a hackathon format is a great connection for people who don't have that outlet to have, and it's particularly, I think, important within the engineering space. Um, as the world has gotten more and more remote and more global, there's probably other outlets for it as well that, I think more maybe there's more social networks, Discord. I mean, maybe there's other ways that people are finding those things that maybe didn't exist so much back then. But I still think engineering world as a whole probably needs more tools to help network and find opportunities that aren't immediately available to them.
Yeah. And that is something we'll dig into a little bit later. I'd love to know, was it the hackathon space that inspired you to go out and try and build your own company, or what was that motivation you spoke that about wanting to have a company? What brought you to that point?
Yeah, no, it was definitely just I had felt for a long time that I wanted to start my own company. I just maybe I wasn't I don't know, confident, or maybe I just didn't have the right idea. I had actually spent about a year working on my own idea before Codewars. It was like kind of this big recommendation site. Um, and I learned a lot from doing it. I built it on my own. I built it in a vacuum. I didn't get out and so like from a product perspective, I really didn't do the right thing of going out and actually finding customers and talking to them. But um it was something that I just had a lot of energy of wanting to own and build something that was more of my idea as opposed to just kind of building something that was somebody else's idea. I've never been a particularly good employee in the sense of when like a requirement was given to me, I would always be like, you didn't think about this, and sometimes I just wouldn't even uh I just wouldn't even really follow it. I would kind of just do my own thing. Fortunately, I have enough background that it works. Probably not like a good career advice for most people, but like for me, it was just always I had more of an opinion about things, and I think, and like throughout my whole career, I've ended up being kind of placed in projects where I could kind of own it. So even in like when I was more junior, I tend to kind of own projects because I had a bit more of an interest in the design, the kind of the end user result, the development of it. And so I was able to kind of do more of that. And so I've had a good taste of like owning things without fully owning the idea throughout my career. And I think I just really wanted to keep doing more of that.
Well, they do say break things fast.
Yeah.
Man, often is always the best way. In breaking things fast and often, what has been overall the most challenging part of Code Wars? Has it been the business? Has there been a feature that you've chased that didn't work out? What has been most challenging?
Yeah, I think the most challenging thing is really just the lack of resource, right? So um there's always kind of just been one engineer, like one Codewars. If you think about its whole lifetime, like for me, it was for a long time, and then I as we needed to find a stable business to help fund Codewars, we kind of moved into taking a lot of what we learned from Codewars and turning it into qualified. And so qualified really became like the main focus because it was cut to a point where we literally ran out of money and was like, we got to put food on the table, right? So it kind of forces you real quick to like respect the business side of things a lot more than I think in the very beginning we were just more concerned with building something that people wanted to use. And it was a huge experiment. I think the whole time building Codewars it's not like we had a master plan of what it was going to be, and then we were just executing on it. Even the foundations of Codewars was kind of built more for like this hackathon thing that we thought we were going to do. And then we ended up doing this thing, and it just became an experiment, and we kind of just kept playing with it. And it kind of organically grew into this really, really amazing thing. But it wasn't like there was a vision in our mind, and we just went and go and executed on that vision. And it got to a point where we really needed to start producing revenue. Like we were, if it was going to continue to survive. And so then we started putting, at least for me, I started putting the majority of my energy in the qualified. But it's always been like Code Wars has its value to the business, but it doesn't have its own business. It doesn't really have its own dedicated business model. We have Codewars Red. Codewars Red actually exists because there was a point where we were so out of money that I thought the whole business was going to shut down. And so I immediately went and dedicated some time to trying to add some paid features so that it could just make enough money to host like pay for its own hosting, and it could kind of survive after the company had died. I was like convinced the company was going to die, and then like right at the last moment some certain events happened that kind of saved us. But um so I think that's always just been the struggle, is just like there's so many amazing things that we want to do with it, and like how do we invest and like pragmatically in the right things, and just shift resources from Code Wars or not. um
Yeah,
I think
that's always a
the other
challenge.
issue there. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing. It's always a challenge with any product is to take every idea and build it into a roadmap that makes sense for the right reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a struggle. I mean, if you're building my own company, I respect so much more. Sometimes you look at a product and you just there's some aspect of it doesn't work very well, and you're like, why did they do it like that? Well, it probably wasn't by choice. It was probably by through some degree of reality of just not being able to do it as complete as they wanted to or something. And I think there's a great, like, the great thing about Code Wars is there's this soul to it that I think has survived over all of these years. There's something that's really special about the experience. Like I remember, even though like the way that you can see solutions right after you complete a kata, that wasn't, we didn't have a plan to go do that. It was just, I remember actually sitting on my couch. I remember I was like, I had my laptop on my lap, and I just completed one, and I was working on something, and I was just kind of curious like what are the other solutions to this that other people are submitting, thinking that my solution made the most, like was kind of like everyone would do it that way. um and so I just quickly created a page to just like show solutions of the crap, but it was just like a quick, let's look at this. And I was just like, holy crap, like I had no idea that there was so many different ways of approaching this problem. It was like a simple problem. It was probably like a 7 or 6 cube uh problem, but I was blown away. And then at that moment, I realized like this is part of the soul of the experience, is like having that effect of like you learn from other people by seeing how they did things after you just did things. Like in that special moment, like you just challenged yourself, you finally completed it. You're like, yes, I did it. And you see everything else, and you're just like, your mind is, explodes. So I think like there's like those special moments that have existed in the site and keep it what it is today. But it's also like the second that I start putting my kind of product manager hat on and thinking about Code Wars and like the things that could be, there's just so many possibilities of places it could go. Um, so that's also the hardest thing, is just wanting to do all those things and not always having the ability to do all of it.
If only there were 700 extra days in the
Yes,
year and clones
exactly.
of every team, and more money than time. Um, so challenges and their solutions being a kind of highlight moment for you of that kind of aha, I've added something to the experience. Is there anything else that you think is being the most rewarding moment of Code Wars over the years?
Well, definitely, like, yeah, I mean, the most obvious answer to that question is just like the amount of people that have, like, I'll just mention it, or somebody will mention it, or not even me, but like a friend of a friend of a friend will mention that to somebody because they find out they're a programmer, and they're like, oh, I know Code Wars, that like it may actually help me a lot, and then it makes it back my way. I've met people who are now directors at like Fortune 500 companies that were like that went through like a data scientist role or something, that kind of came up, and they're like, Code Wars was actually a huge part of my development. And to just see so many people's lives like impacted by it in a positive way, um, that's definitely the most rewarding component of it. It's also a big reason why, like, when we were looking for another company to join, we ended up, Indela was so open and wanted to embrace Code Wars and continue that mission, which was like extremely important, just because you know Code Wars is less about the business and more about the impact that it has and the value that it has is to its users. And so just being able to continue that, and just see that continue to impact people's lives is the thing that I get the most. It makes me smile the most from it.
Definitely, we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for 5 million people active on Code Wars. So thank you all for allowing us to have this conversation today. Speaking of our community, and our community comes in many shapes and sizes across the platform, our Discord, elsewhere online, and kind of hopefully at some point getting together in person as well. But I want to know, is there anything that the community has done that you didn't expect? So how have they driven change on Code Wars or shifted the direction of the platform?
They've done a ton of things I didn't expect. It's like Codewars has taken on a life of its own. It feels like I gave birth to it, but it's grown up and it's moved out of the house and it's like taking on its own life, right? And um I think one is, I mean, there's a number of areas between the open source contributions, especially as we were trying to build um, our code engine for running tests across all these languages. We chose the hardest way possible to do it. Like we used test cases instead of kind of like input output, which is how other sites kind of do it. That took a lot of contribution. Like to know 50 plus languages is not possible for any one or even company to do. You can't bring those level of resources in. So the open source contributions were huge. Um, and they still continue to come in. Languages pop up on the site. I didn't even know the language existed, but it came in, and so that's been huge. I think moderators, in terms of, I think that took out its life of its own, and people kind of showed up and really care about the site and took it under their own kind of their own that they held it for themselves and cared about it in their own way. And I think that a community formed organically. There wasn't like a intention behind setting the moderators. I think it kind of grew organically out of this thing that just existed. And I think that's just like it's such an amazing thing. The crowdsource and the content that came in. I mean, we didn't. It was a total experiment. We had no idea if people were going to want to contribute. Like I think we have over, some of them have been retired and stuff, but I think we have like 16,000 kata and over all time. It's a lot of that's a lot of it's not easy to think of a new idea and to create one of those. Like there's a ton of contributions. And the quality and the diversity of that content and different styles that we've seen. So we had no idea that the crowdsourcing component would be as successful as it has been. And it just allows, like, it's like for the engineering community by the engineering community, right? It's like the community kind of runs itself. And now certainly that you're here, it has a protector to make sure that things are good. But before then, it was largely organic. And a huge shout out to Kaz, by the way. A lot of people in the community will be familiar with that name, but he took over leadership, the engineering leadership of the project years and years ago, and has really helped to get it into like such a better place. And he was also deeply involved with the community as well. And I think, um, but there's so much there that so much work has been done by the community to make it what it is, and it's not something that we designed. It's just something that happened organically.
Best way. And I think everyone will agree. I think there's a couple of maybe disagreements in the chat on YouTube over knowing 50 languages is not possible for one person, and that unnamed would disagree. That's very fair. I think a lot of our mentors and moderators have superpowers in terms of the languages they're willing to absorb and then train on in Code Wars. But I think both of us need to spend a moment thanking one, our moderators, secondly, all of our mentors, anyone who's going through that beta process and reviewing kata. 16,000, I think when we include deleted as well, I've seen 20,000 come up as well in our database. That's an absurd number of
Yeah.
kata. Anyone who's ever written a kata, of course, if you still have one in drafts, go back, try and publish it, and get it into the beta process. Um, but also translations.
Yeah.
How did that? I'd love to know, and this is a little bit of a sidetrack to my question, but how did we end up at translations on top of just having a kata in one language?
Yeah, translations was actually going back to one of your questions, like what were some of the more challenging things like that? I had for the longest time I had no idea how we were going to solve the problem of like converting a kata from one language to another. Um, it the interface like it was kind of intertangled with Kumite. So Kumite is kind of was like an experiment that I think has had, it's not the primary feature of the site and it's had like a moderate success. But it was an idea of like kind of sparring and back and forth. And I think the idea of that and the idea of needing translations kind of came at the same time. Like they were, and then they kind of played off of each other. So they're like that they use a similar kind of there's a similar design to those. Um, but yeah, I mean, the idea of even needing it was such a hard thing to figure out because the way that challenges were like if you looked at like some of the other sites that existed that predated Codewars, they all had more of this like computer science feel where the way that they worked is once you wrote a challenge, it would work in any language because the way that you would just send these like inputs as an input string into the program, and then you'd have to read the inputs, and then you would have to output a special format, and then it would just read the output format. Um, and I didn't like that. I hated that. Well, I don't want to say hate, but I didn't like that style because it felt like you were always doing computer science, and it never really felt like the actual work that you would do in a day-to-day job. And it also felt restrictive. Like there's only so much you can do with the kind of input and output format. And so you always ended up with challenges that were very algorithmic and very kind of theoretical and things that weren't super practical. Um, I wanted to do something that felt like the actual work that you do. And like you go and you build a method and you go and you build test case to test that method. So we use test cases. Um, Hardest way we could have done it because you have to go and set up a new test framework for every language. You have to try to adapt it to output the same test case format so that we can read it the same way. You have to rewrite the code every single time for every language into a new framework. So not smart from like a ease of execution perspective at all, but it felt like that's what that's another part of Codewars' soul is that we decided to take the hard route on that. But yeah, translations, it was difficult. Ultimately, I think the
But it's
translation
worked.
design came out well, and it almost feels kind of obvious to me maybe now, but it wasn't obvious when we were trying to figure it out at the time.
Yeah, major shout out to anyone who has contributed to Code Runner, and any conversations I've seen. It's it's a challenge, but it's paying off. And I think it's really brought people together in trying to solve that problem. You said it before in the chat, is reiterating it, especially out on YouTube, is a major shout out to Kaz. I actually
Yeah.
don't see him. I think he's only coming online now, but I'm sure he'll watch back and everyone needs to shout Kaz out more. Incredible work and so much work behind the scenes. Make sure that everything works. Not just our translations, but every single aspect of the site. Um, I want to stick with community a little bit, and come into some of the questions that we got sent in to our Discord. If you're not on our Discord, log into Code Wars right now. Go to the left-hand side. Halfway down the menu, there's a chat button and join our Discord. That's where you can connect outside of solutions and our discourse on Code Wars. You can connect on any topic all day, every day. Um, but our members have sent in a couple of questions, and I'll start with this one. Um, we've built our community have built over 16,000 kata on Code Wars over the years. Do you have an all-time favorite?
Um, I have an all-time favorite of the one I built, but it's been a long time, to be honest, since I've been using Code Wars myself. So I think I've peeked my head in and seen a lot of really cool content, but I think unless you're really like completing it yourself and you really have that experience of going through the effort, I think I don't they don't necessarily stick. Um, the one that I liked, I had to seed a lot of the content when we first started. And I don't particularly think I was the challenges I built are that great compared to what the community ended up building. And I didn't feel at the time that I wasn't particularly doing. the most amazing job, but fortunately it was good, I guess good enough that people liked it and came. But the one that I really liked the most that I built was called Builder of Things. And because I feel like it embodied kind of what I ultimately was thinking with Code Wars, which was um, it felt it felt novel and it felt like it was not an algorithm. Like algorithm challenges are great, but it was something that really required you to push your limits on like how much you understood the the capabilities of the language. And so I was like a more recent Rubyist at that point. I think I'd only been using Ruby for maybe a year before starting Code Wars. And I was really enamored by metaprogramming. And it's what you can do with it. And so I just decided to build a challenge, like let's just see how far we could go with it. And it kind of one test case after another just gets harder and harder, and you kind of have to work your way through it. So I really like that. I think the reason why it stands out is because of the amazing contributions by the community. Once we added translations, I never thought anybody was going to translate that because it's Ruby and Ruby's like known for metaprogramming and um I didn't think that was going to translate to other languages well, but we ended up translating it into a number of other languages in ways that I didn't know that language could be used that way. So that is particularly exciting for me to see. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think beyond that, I think I'm always excited when I see kata that are um, kind of pushing people's limits, not necessarily in a computer science way, which I still think is important, but I also like I love having software engineering and more of um, something that teaches you how to use something in a way that maybe you don't get a ton of opportunity, right? So going back to the metaprogramming example, it's not that often you actually get to use metaprogramming when you're building. Like normally you use it to kind of build the foundation. So you'll have some framework or some gem or some concept that you're adding to a project, but then once it's added, you just use it. You don't kind of keep writing, metaprogramming. So I think just anything that unlocks the ability to do things that you don't get a lot of opportunity to work on, and that are really important to know. I think those are incredibly mind expanding opportunities, and I think we have a lot of those in the site that need to be unearthed.
And you mentioned there you're not using Code Wars as much as someone who's very focused on product. How can we bring you back? What language do you do you want to learn next that our
Yeah,
community can focus on?
I've actually been thinking about coming back to learn Python. So I never learned Python throughout all this. Ruby, JavaScript, C Sharp. These were kind of my main languages throughout my career. Um, Python is really like for data science, and now for all the different kind of AI, uh, projects that are coming out. You can do a certain amount with JavaScript, and even less with Ruby. There's just not a lot of libraries for Ruby, but most of the libraries are in Python, and I think that's an area where um, I still program today, even though it's not at all in my job description, but it's usually as a means to an end to quickly research something or experiment with an idea. And also to understand something better. So like if we're going to be using technology in what we're doing, like I want to understand how it works so that I can understand its limitations and know that better. Um, and I think right now, I think not knowing Python is a limitation. So that's definitely where you would see me coming back for.
I think we need to be accountability buddies in learning Python. If you do have a Python kata that we should be trying, send it in to us. I think we can make a weekly challenge in our work stream. Um, Digging into the future a little bit, we do have a question from one of our leaderboard members. Is when will Dan level katas be a real thing on Code Wars? So before you answer that specifically, I'd love you to maybe spend a moment for anyone on today's call who doesn't really know about our levels and the gamification on Code Wars. Can you speak to that a little bit and then go into will we have real Dan levels anytime soon?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so the way the levels came to be is that we wanted a leveling system. And the way that the site originally started, it was very Japanese themed. It was kind of like it was a dojo, or we kind of landed on the dojo. And and so it made sense to use that leveling. We also really like the levels because it's weird when you first show up to the site that we start at 8 and go count downward, but it's really the degrees from master that you are. So once you can make it to one dan, you're now at master level, and then it's mastering your way up. The goal um, was that kata would be Q level, but they're not the format isn't big enough to really make it a challenging enough project to really go into the Dan levels. So the goal was always to have more like that's where the hackathon thing comes in, is like there's these like kind of meteor projects that you would work on. And then we'd find a way to kind of score that in kind of, an automated way. And then that would be a Dan level. Another concept we thought of was to actually create like a gamut of things that you have to go through specifically, and maybe like in a event-based format. And as you get through those, then that's kind of like a Dan level. Um, we never really got there. So interesting thing though is, the way the scoring system is set up, I wasn't sure that anyone was ever going to make it themselves rank to a Dan level with only Q level content, kata. Um, Kaz is actually the first person on Codewars ever to make it to Dan level. So we discovered Kaz. He was a user of the site, and he made it. Since then, everyone is we've got a number of Dans, and then we've even made it to 2 Dan. I don't think we have a 3 Dan, do we? I didn't
You're
think that
doing
was like
emojis.
I don't I didn't think that was even like mathematically possible, but like so many kata have been added to the site since then that it's become possible. So yeah, I would like to bring actual Dan level things, but it would be a different activity. It wouldn't be through kata itself.
I love that answer. Also, fun fact, I did not know that about Kaz. Fair play.
Yeah.
Um, do let us know what activity you would like to see us implement for Dan levels. Um, let me see where we are now. Um, if you were to create Code Wars again, and you maybe had a different level system or anything that we currently have, what would you change?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I guess there's a design kind of implementation aspect, and then there's kind of more of the technology execution aspect. From a technology side, when we originally built it, I actually didn't think we were building what it is today. I thought we were going to be building more of a hackathon site where it was really about like SEO, and we wanted to, people were going to be presenting kind of, we wanted to create a space where there was an opportunity for engineers to have their own portfolio, right? If you're a designer, you can go and put your portfolio up. There's like Dribble and these different places. But as an engineer, where do you put your work and let people see it and be proud of it? Um, so we were thinking we were going to be something like that. And so the architecture at the time was more designed to be server side rendered, and it was going to be optimized towards SEO. It was also at a weird time in programming. It was before React, and even Angular, like the old OG Angular was nascent. Back then, if you were going to build like kind of like a an application, using like a front end framework, it was going to be probably like Backbone JS or something. And that wasn't it wasn't a technology I was particularly interested in. So between that and between what we thought, we kind of built it the way we did. But now, and then it ended up being a system that I think would really benefit from like a React or a Vue or a front end framework that would allow it to allow us to do, I think, a lot more. And I think there's a need to upgrade into that, which we want to do. So I think we would love to modernize that. In terms of how we redo the site, I, I don't know that I would redo it. I would do it anyway differently. I think the whole thing was an experiment, and it was a lot of trial and error. And it kind of organically evolved, and I like that. Like I like that a lot. I think if we had set out with kind of a plan, and that we were kind of forced that plan to happen, it would have. I think it would have been a little bit more, I don't know, inauthentic in a way, if that makes any sense. Like I think the way it evolved was kind of the way it had to evolve. With that said, there's definitely like design flaws. I think the area that I would probably fix the most is how we vote on solutions. I think the way that we even show solutions, I think there's a bit of like the highest voted show first, and then it's like once they get votes, it's kind of hard to see anything else. So I think there's a lot more we can improve around that. And I also want to we tried it a couple different ways. Like the voting system we have now was an iteration, but we never had time to fully realize what we wanted to do. I think instead of just voting it up or down, expressing why you like a solution or what you think could the solution could be improved would give better feedback to the user who created the solution as to how they can improve, and it would also give them more understanding of what's working and what's not. And it would also be more educational for the site for people to go and be like, oh, okay, this is the strength of this is the solution. This is the weakness of the solution, right? There's not like the good solution, everything else sucks. There's different things where why one thing might be better than another. Um, and so I think that's the area that I would want to improve the most in terms of how it's designed now. Um, and then yeah, I think that's probably the main thing.
And a kind of a great question that is similar to that discussion is, will we consider incorporating AI into CADA to improve insights on where our strengths and weaknesses are when solving problems? Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I actually think AI is the solution to what I was just speaking of. It's just like because we have so many solutions in the past, anything that we introduce now has to kind of deal with this old data. It's part of the reason why we never updated it, is like it was going to take a big investment. What are we going to do with the old data? It's going to kind of have to reset the board. So I think on one hand, it helps us solve that. And the other hand, it also helps automatic insights, right? So as you're working, you can get an immediate feedback. And it also creates like instead of there's this idea in AI, like especially Gen AI of having a human in the loop, right? Like and what AI generates, you shouldn't just take it as blanket. Okay, this is a good thing. Like you need a human to validate it. We have a lot of humans to validate it, right? Like it's a huge community that looks at these things. So I think there's a really powerful interplay between AI and the kind of our own community feedback and having them work together. So you get more immediacy and you get more personalization. I think the AI can help personalize feedback for the individual who's looking to like understand how they can improve. But there can also be um, the community can come in and help validate that what is being recommended makes sense and also add their own color to it that's not going to come from the AI.
I think our moderators would have a lot to say there. I think they've read a lot of that debate on a weekly basis, but I do think there's no avoiding it, and it will help people in the long run to have something help you be a better programmer. Um, Everyone, we do have about 10 minutes left, so if you have any questions, do put them in the chat. I'd love to know if there is one thing you could do to add to our honor system, any activity that would give you more points or some new gamification feature, what would you add?
I yeah, I think it would I would like to have we never built a like a badging system into it because at the time gamification was like really like everyone was trying to gamify everything. Like every website was gamified even if it didn't make any sense and there was like these badges all over the place and it felt kind of cheesy and we wanted to focus on the kind of the intrinsic value of the site as opposed to just a bunch of extrinsic like badges all over the place. Um but I think now it when designed well, it's a really great way of encouraging people to do certain behaviors that are going to be beneficial to their growth, um, as a concert of things together, as opposed to just individual like honor for individual activities. And I think it also creates um, value on a profile in terms of under like other people understanding like their achievements and things that have been accomplished. Um, and I think it helps build confidence. And I think it's really important. Like the it's called Codewars. There is no war. It's a peaceful community. It's built around challenge. The idea being challenge pushes you to mastery. So we have the gamification and there's the leaderboards and there's the kind of this um there's this aspect of wanting to preserve that as much as we can to because using challenge it motivates someone to want to try harder. But I think ultimately the purpose of Code Wars isn't to have a game and isn't to see who the winner is. It's for every individual using it to get their own growth out of it, right? Like mastery is the mission of Code Wars. To challenge you to push yourself to your limits and to try new things and to grow and to get better. So I think that's the core is things that help motivate around that behavior and to make the people that are the users of the site get that value from it. And I think an achievement system would encourage that, and I think that could tie into the honor and everything. But I think that's a layer that's missing. We could definitely use.
There's some demand already in our chat for custom badges, so that's always good news. And also, do we have any plans to add additional exclusive challenges for Code Wars Red?
Um, No, no. I would love to hear the community feedback around that if you think so. I think when we first introduced it, there was a lot of concern that Codewars Red would create like kind of a sub-community of like a separate experience. And what we wanted to do with it was to layer in additional value without taking away kind of the heart of what it is. But um, I do think what I would like us to move to is to more of an event-based system to where there's like maybe instead of a challenge is just being released whenever they're released and everyone kind of uses it forever, we kind of hold it back so that there's like an event and then like everyone shows up for the event and then there's more of that hackathon kind of spirit and that kind of like competitive spirit. And then you kind of have like it's new to everybody, the challenge, and then you kind of go through it for the event. And then afterwards it's there and everybody can take it, but we kind of hold it back for that. So um maybe there would be like Code Wars Red specific events or exclusive events or something of that nature. I think we still need to figure that out. But um yeah, I mean I would love to have hear from the community like, feedback in terms of what you would like to see in Red and kind of pros and cons and between whether it improves the overall community experience or not. But it's definitely our goal to make sure that everybody is getting a learning opportunity from Code Wars, and it's not just um, there aren't certain things that are only a Code Wars Red opportunity.
Of course. And if you do want something added, let us know. We're always listening. So you can ask us on Discord or email us with any idea at any time. We also have our GitHub as well, where you can add issues and ideas. Jake, what's next for Code Wars?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think what's really exciting for me is that when we started the mission of Code Wars, it was um, to build a system that allowed us to find incredible talent who may not have come from some college or especially at that time, like, it was pedigree was kind of how you got hired. And as a person who didn't go to college and was self-taught and kind of I was able to find my own path to a career, not everyone has found that, right? So, or they found a career, but they're pretty bored in their job and they're that's why they probably come maybe why they're coming to Code Wars is to look for something that's interesting to them and make programming fun because they're not excited about like their career where it's at. And so I think that was step one was to create a space for people to grow and get better and maybe learn in a way that you're not getting that challenge in whatever situation you're in. But it was also the mission to help find like the best way to master is like when you go to work and you're spending 8 hours a day working, like if you're passionate about your job and you're passionate about the work you're doing, that's going to be the best way to master the art, right? Like it's like Code is a supplement for that, but that's the main way. And so how do we help people find the career opportunity that's going to give them that? And that's what like so I think that was a big reason why we joined Indela was because Indela's mission is similar. Right? Like the opportunity, brilliance or sorry, brilliance is distributed, opportunity is not, was kind of the mission of Indela since its beginning. And I like to think that with Code Wars, brilliance is distributed, mastery is earned. And so as you earn that mastery and you become great, like let's move you into a role where you can continue to grow and continue to get better. So I want to continue to find a way to bridge seamlessly that journey, because I think it's really important and it's always been part of our mission. And it just kind of got sidetracked a little bit, I think. And now I think we're back on track and we're going to get back to it.
2025 is going to have so many new things on Code Wars. It's not only that I can sense that, I have looked. There's going to be so many things. It's going to be a very exciting year. And here's another, every time you guys let us know what you're thinking about, I get so excited. I'm like, oh, we should do that. Would we consider uploading videos for educational purpose, such as editor picks or similar content? Have we done that before? What are your thoughts on that?
I love that idea. I think we would consider it for sure.
Definitely. I think that came from Jay. Jay, reach out to me. Let's hear your ideas and we'll see what we could do. We have 1 minute left. Oh, sorry. If anyone has any other questions, this is your very last chance to ask us live on today's call. Otherwise, you're gonna have to wait for a snail mail version of an answer through Discord. So do get your question in. Or Jake, as we wait for a question, is there anything you'd like to ask the community that they can get back to us on?
Um, I'd love to understand if everyone could write in like how they've gotten value from Codewars. Because not only is it good for I think for us to do that in a public forum where everyone else can understand that, but I think we can see the patterns and find things that make it easier for us to focus on in terms of how we improve. Because that's still that's the main thing is that you're actually growing and you're actually mastering your craft from using the site. So I would love to hear that from the community.
Definitely. I want to hear that every day. I think we don't hear it enough. So please do share that with us. Um, Jay did say earlier that he is really enjoying Code Wars. It's being an incredibly helpful experience for him. Sorry, Jay, I don't mean to gender you, but you found it really, really valuable in numerous ways, and that means the world to us. And that is something that I think when we do hear it, we hear that from most of you, all 5 million of you. We are at time. So Jake, I'll say thank you so much for joining us. That was a very, very insightful conversation, and I hope we can have more like this. If you'd like to see more live streams from Code Wars, let us know what you'd like to see. Do you want more interviews like this? Can we do maybe a live hackathon? Let us know in the comments in the chat and also on Discord. We will see you hopefully in the discourse of a Python kata in the next few weeks or months as both myself and Jake try to level up our skills in Python. Thank you so much, Jake, and thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you